everyone. My name is Darwin, and today we are going to discuss various literary criticisms. Um, Now, the criticisms basically are crucial because it allows us to understand um, literary criticisms and see it in various angles. It simply means that by simply using a certain literary criticism, it would allow us to interpret a single text differently. It will give us different meanings and will not simply provide us, a single interpretation. Now, today's discussion will basically focus on the criticism itself and its various concepts, its basic concepts, I should say, but we'll be focusing on its concepts. We'll might be able to give examples along the way. But these things that I'll be discussing today will are included in the handouts that I sent to you guys. So anyway, let's get started. We'll begin with the coverage, by the way, of these discussion include structuralism, deconstructionism, um, psychoanalytic criticism, Marxism, and feminism. Although the formalism is not yet included, but that will be discussed on a separate video. So for now, let's move on to the first one, structuralism. I'll no longer be discussing about its history because it will take us some time. But for now, we'll be focusing on its concepts, or assumptions, or conventions. So the first one that we have here says that codes, signs, and rules govern all human social and cultural practices, including communication. Now, we have to ask ourselves, we have to know first the definitions of these codes, the signs, and the rules. So basically, we have these, rules that we usually follow. This is somewhat like structuralism's main concepts focus on the rules governing language and its relationship to the culture. Now, the interpretation of the text involves cultural understanding as well. The structuralism somehow is influenced by the codes and the conventions and the rules that were again culturally defined and provided by us human beings. But that also follows that the language that we've been using is composed of um, signs which somehow is structured. In other words, the culture, including language itself, follows a certain kind of structure, and this structure is created by man. So that's how we say it. That's how we explain it. Now the question is, what are these rules, and what is its relationship to, or what are its relationship to understanding language? We have to move on to the next concept to better understand it. But for now, those are the basic concepts first. That language in our culture is culturally defined and is structured by us human beings. Now, these codes give meaning to all our social cultural customs and behaviors. Since structuralism is somewhat has to do with the understanding a literary text by simply focusing as well on the context, not only the content but also the context. When we say context, this somehow includes things that are happening in the society when the text was written. That also includes the background of the author, the social issues that was happening during the time. So that were happening during the time. So those are the things that were included in the context. The content, however, is somewhat different because it does not involve any social issues nor the author's background. It simply focuses on the text itself without concerning itself about the outside factors. Anyway, so those that's letter B. The next one is, it says the proper study of meaning and therefore reality is an investigation of a system behind the practices, not the individual parts that fit together to function. So it somewhat generalizes the concept wherein you have to focus on in understanding reality. That also includes understanding literature. You have to focus on the system, the underlying, relationship between and among these, science and the rules. And that also includes, you have to go beyond the text. That means you have to include the context and also the content, not simply focusing on the content. This is somewhat different to the structuralism, because in formalism, I should say, this is different to formalism, because structuralism includes context, while formalism merely focuses on the content. Okay. Now, in structuralism, you have to include the context. You have to understand the underlying factors as well. That also includes the system behind, these practices. Why do we put meaning to a certain word? Um, who provided, the meaning of a certain word or an idea. So structuralism somehow investigates, the occurrences, the rules governing the creation of meaning. Now, letter D, it says meaning, this one, meaning can be found in the relationship among various components of a system. So the main concern of structuralism is to dig deeper into, to uncover the meaning of a certain literary text by understanding the relationship. Now, this is again going back, this is the relationship of the content and the context, not merely focusing on the content. To make it clear, content focuses, it focuses on the language, the symbols, figurative languages, the characters, for example, in all the elements of a character, of the narrative. If it's a short story, for example, or if it's a poem, then it focuses mainly on the language, the symbols, and so on and so forth. Now, in structuralism, you have to take into consideration the relationship of the content, the language itself, the words used in the text, to the outside factors. Again, the way on how we human beings somehow structured meaning to make sense of it. Now, letter E, the proper study of literature involves an inquiry into the conditions surrounding the act of interpretation itself. So this is the thing that I've been talking about earlier. This is about the study of literature involving an inquiry into the conditions that were, that these that it says in here is the context itself. How literature conveys meaning, not an in-depth investigation of the individual work. Not an in-depth investigation of the individual work means that you shouldn't merely focus on, whatever the language being used on the text, or whatever the symbolic meaning of a text, based on the, without considering the outside factors. Now, the outside factors should be related to these structures. So what is the structure anyway? It says that the proper study of literature involves an inquiry into the conditions surrounding. Hold on, not that. So letter F. We move on to letter F. So what is the structure? The structure of literature is like the structure of language, having self-enclosed system. Now, to better understand the text, we have to connect or identify the underlying structure that may be used to understand it. The structure that I've been talking about earlier, that's somehow is created by man, by human beings, by us human beings. So we have to understand how these things are related. Each individual words in the text somehow is related to our schema, or the knowledge that we know about that word. The center of interpretative methodology focuses on the text, letter G. The center of interpretative methodology focuses on how the text conveys meaning rather than what meaning is being conveyed. So yeah, it's very easy to understand. In structuralism, it focuses on how we arrive into meaning, not instead of us focusing on the meaning itself. We shouldn't be satisfied with understanding the meaning itself, but we have to answer the question about how we come up with that particular meaning. How the text means, not what text means, is the chief interest. So we're talking about the process of uncovering the meaning, not merely about getting the meaning out of the text, but rather the process on how we were able to arrive into that meaning. Now, structuralism demystifies literature by using a scientific and objective analysis of how readers interpret text. Now, structuralism somehow, since it's systematic, we have to understand the structure. It also makes use of the so-called scientific and objective analysis uh, and understanding a text. That also means that we somehow become objective into arriving into the meaning. Instead of us guessing the meaning based on what we know, we have to rather follow a certain process. It does not consider literary work a mystical or magical relationship between the author and the reader, a place where author and reader share emotions, ideas, and truth. Now, let's talk about meaning. So, the main purpose of structuralism is to understand the process on how we come up with the meaning. But what is meaning anyway? Meaning, in here it says, is governed by the system that governs the writer, not an individual author's personal quirks. The author himself, although he has all these mental faculties, somehow creative works, but the creative works or the work of the author himself or herself somehow is also governed by a certain system. He or she might also be related to a certain system, and that is being inspired by it, and somehow write about it. Now, the meaning somehow, the meaning that can be derived from the text that is written by the author is not created by himself alone. Instead, it's just an idea that is being influenced to him, but he or she is not the one who conceived that idea. So we have to understand, again, going back to the question, how that particular author somehow were able to come up with that meaning, how he was able to use language to represent an idea that is basically already existed. Okay. So another description of a meaning is that meaning can be expressed only through his of these shared system of relations, not in an author's stated intentions or the reader's private experiences. So the meaning itself is already there. It's just that the author, including the reader, somehow creates their own. Somehow we're able to come up with an interpretation, but that interpretation has already been there, has already been laid out. It simply means that it was already part of the structure, and it's somehow the structure that we're talking about in language proves to produce that kind of interpretation. The last one, it says it emphasizes the form and structure, not the actual content of the text. It emphasizes the form and structure, not the actual content of the text. So this is again going back a juxtaposition of juxtaposing the formalism versus the structuralism. Wherein structuralism focuses on the structure, focuses on the form, while formalism focuses on the content itself. It focuses on the language, how the symbols, the figurative language, and all how these language were somehow modified or manipulated in order to come up with the meaning. Now, that is, its focus is mainly on the rule governed system that underlies the text rather than the text itself. So I hope you were able to, at least get an idea of what structuralism is all about, its main focus, and its difference to formalism. Now let's move on to the main concepts of structuralism. So if you're going to use structuralism, you have to understand these basic concepts. Number one, the mythm. So what is mythm? The recurrent themes which transcended culture and time, speaking directly to the minds and hearts of the people. It finds its meaning through opposition. So the myth themes are, these are the ideas that has been repeatedly presented in various texts. These can be a good, say, good is rewarded and evil is punished. So it's a theme. It has to be in sentence, and it has to be in a complete idea, of course, not in a word. But these ideas have been repeatedly presented in the text in various manner. Characters may be good, characters may be evil. We may see a lot of characters as as a protagonist fighting against an evil character. So, but at the end of the story, we see here that again, good is rewarded, and then evil is punished, and then it keeps going on and on and on repeatedly, without us noticing that it somehow shows to us the same exact themes on our idea, but with various characters, with different characters in different forms. But anyway, so yeah, that's one of the examples of of me theme. Good is rewarded and any evil is punished. Um, Now we also have to understand the so-called binary oppositions or minimal pair. Now, despite the fact that structuralism somehow covers language, but it doesn't mainly focuses on the language itself. What I mean to say is that structuralism makes use of the so-called binary opposition, and it makes sense because without binary oppositions, we might not be able to understand the underlying structure in a text. But what is binary opposition anyway? And what is the origin of it? Now, in language, we have these phonetics, as we call it. So, wherein we were able to understand. It talks about, sorry, it's a study of how the sounds is produced. In this case, let's say P, this one, P, B, T, D, K, and G, S, and Z. So these somehow are um, phonemes. Okay. Now we have to understand. We may be able to understand, all these things by simply, understanding or identifying its differences. We have to, see how we have to hear how P is pronounced compared to B or T. Without the presence of these differences, P might sound P, okay, or B might sound same exact thing. So we have to be particular with its differences to make sense of the word. Now, similar to language, similar to a text, we have to understand, we have to be aware of these differences in a text, particularly focusing on ideas, say good and evil. So we have to be particular with with the differences of these two things. What makes evil evil? What makes good good? What makes day, and what makes night night? So we don't simply say them, or we don't simply use them in a certain literary text. We have to be particular of these features of the surrounding ideas, or the established idea that is somewhat associated to these particular words. Okay. Now, those are the binary oppositions. Now, we have a lot of binary oppositions in various literary texts, and somehow, again, going back, these are all repeated, or repeated in say, I mentioned already the good versus evil, man versus technology, or dark versus goodness versus evilness, the evil which has been somehow been represented by evil character and good characters, human beings versus nature. So you see man versus nature, man being represented, of course, obviously by man, and then we have like the nature being represented by monsters, by wolves, by or werewolves, by all the monsters that who were residing in some magical places. So these monsters per se were somehow a representation, were simply a representation of the nature itself. Um, or this can be gods versus human beings, and so on and so forth. So there are some basic binary opposites that we can also determine in certain texts. Say man versus woman. So you have to understand, we have to be particular with these binary oppositions. We might not be able to understand the presence of man if without the presence of a woman, for example. What else? Um, Perfection versus imperfection. Okay. Most of the time, we have the antonyms. If you know a lot of you know a lot of words that in their opposites. And these are the examples of binary oppositions. Okay. love versus hate, okay, and other values. So these are the examples of binary oppositions. Now, in a certain text, again, we can come up with a lot of binary oppositions. And again, the presence of binary oppositions provide a structure in a certain text. Um, uh, say hell and heaven. These binary opposition most of the time becomes the center of the text, uh, and is being resolved by the author himself or herself. Okay. Now, again, going back without the binary opposition, say heaven and hell, we might not be able to understand the text. Why is it that angels were fighting? Uh, why is it that demons were somehow thrown to hell? Why is it that human beings were fighting these monsters? Again, to make clear of to make sense of the text, we have to understand these differences existing between those two aspects or perhaps group of characters in it. Now we also have the so-called letter C, structuralist narratology, the science of narrative. It illustrates how the story's meaning develops from its overall structure of language. Also, we have the narrative themes, 31 fixed elements that occur in a given sequence, whose function identifies predictable patterns that central characters enact to further the plot of the story. So those are the basic concepts of a structuralism. Okay, I just wanted to give you a short discussion about its difference to formalism. So in formalism, going back, it focuses on the language. It focuses on the symbols and its meaning. It focuses on how language or how the language is manipulated in order to arrive into meaning. Now, structuralism, although it also includes language, but it doesn't necessarily focuses on the meaning of of a certain symbol. Rather, it focuses on the idea surrounding that particular word and how that binary opposite somehow is occurs or manifests in that particular text. Okay. So yeah, that's all for structuralism. Thank you so much. Next discussion will be about deconstructionism.